The faint scent of antiseptic lingered in the air as Dr. Adrian leaned in close, his voice a low murmur. "You're holding a lot of tension here," he said, his hands gently kneading the small of her back. "I can feel it." His touch was firm yet intimate, sending an undeniable shiver down her spine. She glanced up, catching his piercing gaze, and for a moment the sterile walls of the clinic seemed to disappear, replaced by an electric current that crackled between them. Dr. Adrian Clark was everything Caroline had imagined a doctor to be: sharp, confident, and undeniably handsome. His reputation preceded him, not only for his skill in orthopedic care, but for the charm that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Patients adored him, nurses blushed in his presence, and Caroline, well, she found herself unable to look away from him every time she walked into his office. It had started innocently enough. Caroline had booked an appointment to address a nagging shoulder pain that had been plaguing her for months. She was a runner and a busy professional, constantly juggling deadlines and long workouts, and the strain on her body was beginning to take its toll. The first time she met Dr. Clark, she was struck by his easy demeanor. His dark hair was neatly combed, his jawline sharp, and his voice carried a calm authority that put her at ease. But it was his eyes, deep and soulful with a hint of mischief, that left her breathless. "Let's see what we're dealing with," he had said during their first session, his tone warm yet professional. As the weeks passed, Caroline began to look forward to her appointments with an anticipation she couldn't quite explain. His examinations always lingered just a little longer than necessary, his hands firm and precise as they assessed her range of motion or worked out tight muscles. Each touch sent a thrill through her, awakening something inside her she hadn't felt in years. One evening, Caroline's session was scheduled later than usual. The clinic was quieter, the usual hum of voices and footsteps replaced by the soft ticking of the wall clock. Dr. Clark greeted her with his signature smile, holding the door open as she stepped into his office. "Rough day?" he asked, noticing the slump in her shoulders. She nodded, letting out a tired sigh. "You could say that. Deadlines are killing me." He chuckled, motioning for her to sit. "Well, let's take a look. I've noticed you've been carrying a lot of tension lately. It's no wonder your shoulder hasn't fully healed." Caroline followed his instructions, lying face down on the padded examination table. She felt his hands on her back, strong yet gentle, as he began to work on the knots in her muscles. "You're holding a lot here," he said softly, his thumbs pressing into the tender spots along her spine. Caroline closed her eyes, letting out a quiet sigh. His touch was intoxicating, a mix of professionalism and something more. She felt herself relaxing under his hands, the weight of her stress melting away with each movement. "Does that hurt?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. "Not at all," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The room felt smaller, more intimate as the silence stretched between them. His hands moved lower just above her waist, and Caroline's breath hitched. "You okay?" he asked, his tone laced with concern. "Yes," she replied, her voice trembling. "It feels good." Dr. Clark paused for a moment, his hands still resting on her back. She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. The tension in the room was palpable, and Caroline's heart raced as she saw the hesitation in his eyes, quickly replaced by something deeper. "Caroline," he said, his voice a husky whisper, "this might be crossing a line." "I don't care," she said, the words leaving her lips before she could second-guess herself. She sat up, their faces inches apart now, the proximity sending her pulse into overdrive. His hand reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice trembling with restraint. Instead of answering, Caroline leaned in, her lips finding his in a kiss that was hesitant at first, but quickly deepened. His hands cupped her face, pulling her closer as the floodgates opened. His touch, no longer clinical, was filled with a passion that left her breathless. His lips moved against hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine, and she found herself clinging to him, her fingers tangling in his hair. Caroline's breath caught in her throat as Dr. Clark's hands trailed down her arms, his touch sending waves of heat through her body. She had never imagined she would be here, in this moment, with her doctor, but the need, the desire was undeniable. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and all the tension, all the buildup over the past weeks had culminated in this one explosive moment. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against hers. "We shouldn't," he said, his voice hoarse. "This could cost us both everything." Caroline's heart was racing, but she couldn't tear herself away from him. She wanted this more than anything. "I don't care," she breathed, the words coming out shaky. "I want you." His gaze darkened, and without another word he kissed her again, this time with a desperation that matched her own. His hands roamed, exploring the curve of her back, the heat of her skin under his fingertips. Caroline responded in kind, her fingers trembling as they traced the lines of his jaw, feeling the stubble against her skin. Every kiss, every touch felt like it was meant to be. The world outside the office ceased to exist. All that mattered was the heat between them, the magnetic pull that seemed to draw them together. Time seemed to lose all meaning as they gave in to their desires. His hands moved lower, grazing the hem of her blouse, and she didn't hesitate to lift her arms, allowing him to pull it over her head. She could feel his eyes on her as he took in her bare skin, and the way his gaze burned into her only intensified the desire swirling between them. "Caroline," he murmured, his hands gently caressing her arms. "I'm not sure we should." She cut him off with another kiss, her hands pushing his shirt off his shoulders. "Stop," she whispered. Just let it happen." He hesitated for a moment longer, his eyes searching hers, but when she met his gaze, the resistance melted away. He kissed her again, this time with a hunger that spoke volumes. They moved together in perfect sync, a dance that had been building without either of them realizing it. The office that once felt sterile and clinical now seemed like a sanctuary, their sanctuary. Caroline's heart pounded in her chest as Dr. Clark's hands slid over her body, every touch igniting a fire within her. The tension from earlier, the unspoken desire, had finally been released, and neither of them wanted it to stop. But as the minutes turned into an hour, reality began to creep back in. The world outside the office was still there, and soon, the weight of what they were doing began to settle in. Caroline lay back against the desk, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she tried to catch her breath. Dr. Clark stood beside her, his expression unreadable as he buttoned his shirt. This wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered, his voice laced with guilt. Caroline sat up, pulling her blouse back on, her mind racing. "I don't regret it," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. He met her gaze, his eyes conflicted. "Neither do I," he admitted, though his tone was edged with uncertainty. There was a long silence before he spoke again. "We have to be careful, if anyone finds out." "I know," Caroline said, cutting him off. She stood up and straightened her clothes, the reality of their situation sinking in. "But I don't want to stop. I don't think I can." Dr. Clark ran a hand through his hair, clearly torn. "This is risky, Caroline. We both have a lot to lose." She moved closer to him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "I know, but sometimes the things that are worth it are the most dangerous." As the evening wore on, both of them knew they couldn't keep this a secret forever. The risk was high, and the consequences of getting caught would be severe. But neither of them could deny what had happened. The connection they shared was undeniable. As Caroline walked out of the office that night, she glanced back at Dr. Clark, who was still standing by the door, his expression unreadable. There was a flicker of something, desire, regret, anticipation, shining in his eyes. She knew this was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. As the door clicked shut behind her, Caroline's heart pounded in her chest. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. But a part of her, the part that had been dormant for so long, felt more alive than ever. What came next was anyone's guess. But one thing was for sure. Dr. Clark and Caroline would never be the same. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Caroline. Every time she thought of Dr. Clark, her heart raced and her skin burned with the memory of his touch. But there was an underlying current of fear, a nagging thought that someone might have seen them, or worse, that he might have second thoughts. Her phone buzzed late one evening, pulling her out of her spiraling thoughts. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach flip. It was a text from him. "I can't stop thinking about you. Can we talk?" Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She wanted to respond immediately, but a part of her hesitated. Was this really the right thing to do? Could they keep this a secret? Despite her reservations, she typed back, "I can't stop thinking about you either. When and where?" Later that week, they met in his private office, this time after clinic hours. The staff had long gone home, and the building was cloaked in an eerie silence. Caroline's pulse quickened as she stepped inside, finding him leaning against his desk, his tie loosened and his expression serious. "You came," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I had to," she replied, closing the door behind her. The click of the lock echoed through the room, amplifying the tension. Dr. Clark crossed the room in 2 long strides, his hand reaching out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Caroline, I've been trying to stay away, but—" His voice trailed off as his fingers brushed her cheek. "But you couldn't," she finished for him, her voice trembling. He didn't reply, at least not with words. Instead, he pulled her into a kiss that was both desperate and tender, as though he had been holding himself back for far too long. Caroline melted into him, her hands gripping the fabric of his shirt as if afraid he might slip away. As their relationship deepened, their secret meetings became a regular occurrence. They were careful, always ensuring no one could trace their moments together. Late-night rendezvous in his office, stolen glances during her appointments, and fleeting touches in empty hallways became their new normal. But the secrecy only added to the intensity of their connection. Every kiss, every touch carried the weight of what they were risking. Caroline felt herself falling deeper, unable to resist the pull of his presence. One evening, after another stolen moment in his office, she leaned against his chest, her fingers tracing lazy circles on his shirt. "Do you ever think about what would happen if someone found out?" she asked softly. "All the time," he admitted, his hand running through her hair. "But I can't stop. Not now, not with you." His words sent a thrill through her, but they also carried an unspoken warning. The longer this went on, the higher the stakes became. Their careful facade began to crack one fateful afternoon when Caroline arrived at the clinic for a follow-up appointment. She noticed the receptionist giving her a strange look, her smile a little too forced. As Caroline walked toward Dr. Clark's office, she overheard hushed voices coming from the staff lounge. "Have you noticed how often she's here?" one nurse whispered. "And always with him." "Something's going on," another replied. "You don't think." Caroline's stomach dropped, and she quickened her pace, desperate to put distance between herself and the murmurs. When she reached his office, Dr. Clark was already there, his expression clouded with worry. "We have a problem," he said, shutting the door behind her. "People are starting to talk." Caroline's breath hitched. "What do we do?" "I don't know," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But we need to be more careful, much more careful." Their connection remained as fiery as ever, but the pressure was beginning to take its toll. Every glance over their shoulders, every hushed conversation, chipped away at the thrill of their secret. One evening, as they sat together in his office, Caroline finally voiced what had been weighing on her heart. "Adrian," she began, using his first name for the first time. "Do you think this is worth it?" He froze, his eyes meeting hers. "What do you mean?" "This. Us. As much as I care about you, I'm scared. Scared of losing everything. My job, my reputation, you." He reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. "I've asked myself the same question every day since we started this, and the answer is always the same. Yes, it's worth it. You're worth it." The stakes were higher than ever, but neither of them was ready to let go. What began as a forbidden spark had grown into something far more dangerous and far more beautiful. But as their world threatened to crumble around them, one question remained. How far were they willing to go for love? Caroline's heart pounded in her chest as she sat across from Dr. Clark in his dimly lit office. The tension between them was unbearable, thickened by the growing rumors swirling around the clinic. Tonight, they had decided to confront the reality of their situation, but the air was charged with something far more primal. Dr. Clark leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze locked on hers. "Caroline, I think this might have to stop," he said, the words coming out reluctantly. "It's becoming too risky." She felt a pang of pain at his words but refused to let it show. Instead, she stood, moving toward the door with measured steps. "If that's how you feel—" she said quietly, her hand resting on the doorknob. Then I'll go. But she didn't leave. She paused, turning to face him, her eyes glinting with a mix of defiance and desire. Unless, she added, her voice dropping to a sultry whisper, you can convince me otherwise. Dr. Clark's eyes widened, his body tensing as if she had issued a challenge he couldn't ignore. Caroline, don't, he began, but his words faltered as she slowly unbuttoned her blouse, revealing the delicate lace beneath. What's the matter, Doctor? She teased, her voice soft but charged with electricity. Afraid to cross the line one last time? He stood abruptly, closing the distance between them in 3 strides. His hand caught her wrist, halting her movements. You don't know what you're doing, he said, his voice rough with restraint. Don't I? She asked, leaning in closer. I've known exactly what I've wanted since the moment I met you. His resolve crumbled as she pressed her body against his, her lips brushing his ear. So, Doctor, she whispered, her voice dripping with mischief, are you going to stop me? Instead of answering, he captured her lips in a kiss that was wild and unrestrained. His hands slid around her waist, pulling her closer as their bodies collided with a fiery intensity. Caroline let out a soft gasp as he spun her around, pressing her back against the door. His hands roamed, exploring her curves as their passion ignited like a firestorm. Caroline, he murmured against her neck, his breath hot against her skin, this is madness. Then don't stop, she replied, her voice a mixture of urgency and desire. As their breaths mingled and their bodies moved in sync, a faint sound shattered the intimacy of the moment, a soft knock at the door. Both froze, their hearts pounding as reality came crashing back. Dr. Clark's eyes widened in alarm, and Caroline's stomach dropped. Adrian, a woman's voice called from the hallway, sweet and familiar. Are you in there? Caroline's blood ran cold. She looked up at him, panic written all over her face. Who is that? She whispered, her voice barely audible. His expression was unreadable as he whispered back, My wife. The words hit her like a freight train. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth as the gravity of the situation sank in. Dr. Clark grabbed her wrist, his eyes pleading, Caroline, wait. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Adrian, I saw your car outside. Why is the door locked? Caroline's heart raced as she fumbled to straighten her clothes, her mind spinning. This wasn't just forbidden, it was catastrophic. Hide, he hissed, motioning toward the small storage closet in the corner. Without thinking, she darted inside, closing the door just as the office door unlocked with a soft click. From the darkness of the closet, she heard the muffled sound of his wife's voice, the warmth in her tone cutting like a knife. You've been working so late lately, she said. I thought I'd surprise you with dinner. Dr. Clark's voice was strained but calm. That's sweet, but I've got a lot of charts to finish. Caroline held her breath, her heart hammering in her chest as she listened to the conversation unfold. She was trapped, mere feet away from the woman whose life she had unknowingly disrupted. As the door finally closed behind his wife, the room plunged into silence. Caroline emerged from the closet, her face pale, her emotions a chaotic mess. Dr. Clark looked at her, his expression a mixture of guilt and regret. You should go, he said softly, his voice laced with finality. Caroline didn't argue. She grabbed her bag, her mind reeling as she left the office without a word. The thrill, the passion, it was all tainted now. And as she stepped out into the cold night air, one thought consumed her. Some lines weren't meant to be crossed.